In the world of the commentary genre on YouTube, it's not uncommon to see a healthy helping of criticism slung not only by the content creators, but at them as well. I personally have gotten a few videos made on me, both good and bad, and I've prided myself on being able to take apart situations and criticize those involved, even if they're my peers. On the flip side, I've also prided myself on being able to look at a situation that's seen by a large portion of the public as black and white and flip it on its head, revealing there's not only more to it than meets the eye, but there's also a lesson or two to be learned in the process. Speaking of which, you guys who are familiar with me may also know a YouTuber by the name of Daft Pina, who's made a name for himself in the good old CC, talking about cartoonists, reviewers, tracers, and in this case, a groomer by the name of John Bob. The John Bob situation itself isn't actually that important to go into for this story, but rather the ideas floating around it and Daft's video covering the topic. On Twitter, he promoted the video, promising not only a documentary, but also an interview with John himself, and looking at the ratio of quote retweets and replies to likes, Twitter had a lot to say about it. I honestly couldn't believe my eyes at just how much backlash Daft was receiving when the video had only just been released, but then I remembered I was on Twitter, where impulsivity and assumptions are one of the most rampant diseases to go around since STDs in the 1960s. Claim after claim after claim about the video was made, in many cases by people that either didn't watch the video, completely misinterpreted what the video's purpose was, didn't know what certain words meant, or even this, I guess. I'll explain all that in a second, don't you worry, but before that I should address that, like most situations blown up by Twitter, I think there are lessons to be learned on both sides here, ranging from specific to broad, and so I hope both sides will listen and keep an open mind. With that said, why don't we take a look at why people dislike this video, and see if we can make sense of it. Oh, and by the way, I know it may seem weird seeing me upload a video after all this time that isn't the big, uber long one I've been hyping up, but don't worry, this is just a side project to keep you all entertained while I work. I'm not even editing this, you understand? Good. Let's check out these reasons. This situation is probably the only section relating to a very specific part within Daft's video, and only takes up a small portion of it, but over everything else on Twitter, it's what Daft has been probably most criticized for other than, quote, platforming John. To explain it in a bit of a tangent, Dylan is a former friend of the YouTuber and groomer Cosmodor, whom I also talked about in a video. He belonged to Cosmodor's private Discord server, and Daft got to speak with him about it before the full story broke loose. Dylan would later go on to spread these DMs online, claiming Daft was far too harsh towards an at the time 16-year-old Dylan, saying he'd be abetting Cosmo by not giving information on the server. This is important to know, as during the period when Cosmo was being called out, Dylan went after YouTuber LS Mark, constantly getting on him, a fellow minor, for not speaking on the situation earlier, when Mark himself didn't even realize at the time he was attemptedly groomed by Cosmo as well. Daft used these tweets in the John Bob video to give an example similar to how when John Bob was outed, others he associated with were harassed, even if they didn't do anything to warrant scrutiny. LS Mark was associated with Cosmo for a good time, so he got backlash when Cosmo was called out. Despite in the John Bob video Daft never mentioning the whole Cosmo server thing about Dylan, Dylan claimed the usage of the tweets was meant as a defamatory statement towards him because he apologized to Mark in DMs and Daft just had blood with him for exposing the truth of their DMs in the past. But some aspects need to be taken into consideration here. First, in the instance with Cosmodor, Daft did know Dylan's age at the time, but that doesn't disregard a few other aspects about Daft's motives for speaking as he did. He knew Dylan as a guy in Cosmo's server for over a year that wasn't obliging to share info about Cosmo after Daft found out he was a groomer. Daft believed his withholding of information could mean he may be complicit in what Cosmo was doing, so he stated as much, not as a threat or anything, but as a statement to try and reason with Dylan and help him understand what not saying anything would imply if he did have something significant to the case he wasn't showing. There's also the possibility of Daft not believing Dylan's age in the beginning, considering the possibility of some of Cosmo's other Predator friends being in the server, though that's only speculation based on a comment where Cosmo says he hangs with actual predators based on age difference. In the end, should Daft have treated the situation differently as Dylan turned out to be a minor? Sure. As a recently turned 17-year-old myself, I can understand feeling pressure in that kind of scenario, so Daft's blunt approach, while not necessarily wrong, could be seen as a bit too harsh, but as a person similar in age, I can also say that withholding that kind of info out of some kind of obligation can make you look incredibly suspicious and possibly abetting a known groomer. We now know Dylan did not do that, and I want to make that explicitly clear, but this was in an early stage of the drama before Daft saw what was in the server. What I'm trying to say is that in this instance, Dylan can be mad about how he was talked to if he likes. to an extent, but Daft had just as much reason to act as he did, and saying it ruins his credibility or shows him to be a terrible person is a massive stretch from a biased standpoint. Like I said, that isn't to mean that Dylan is 100% in the wrong or doesn't have reason to be upset, but it's not nearly as bad as he says it is. Second, the tweets of Dylan constantly going against and harming Mark's image were, and still are, up, but even by using advanced search, I was never able to find a tweet where he exclaimed that he had apologized to Mark. I mean, not until this very tweet under Daft's video release. Dylan himself pulled the age card in saying he should have been given the benefit of the doubt with Cosmo, but Mark was the same age, so why wouldn't he get the same courtesy? Third, Mark still feels hurt by this and is uncomfortable with Dylan non-consensually showing their private DMs, something he has done multiple times. So no matter how you want to splice it, he has done wrong in this situation and is not nearly as much of a victim as he originally claimed to be. That isn't to say that Daft hasn't made mistakes, but the usage of Dylan's tweets was fine as, like I said, they're still up, and what matters most here is the comparison of John and his associates, not the situation with Mark and Dylan itself, or even the situation between Daft and Dylan in DMs, as that wasn't related to the video. People harped on this specifically based on the information Dylan gave, and if there's a moral to this portion, it's that you shouldn't take everything someone says at face value. Discord messages can leave out context, people can say they apologize for things, but if they didn't say so publicly until that moment, it doesn't count towards them, and if the person making the claim has shared cropped private DMs of multiple people without consent, they may not be the most reliable source of information. Dylan doesn't seem like a bad person by any stretch, and he has his own negative experiences with Cosmo specifically, but the way he's trying to blow up the situation for how Daft talked to and about him is not something I can abide by. Moving onward to a more general criticism, Daft was criticized for making the video at all because, as some said, it only stated what was already out there, and people are trying to move on from the situation. Both of these statements are incredibly flawed for, I would hope, obvious reasons. On the claim of Daft only covering what's already out there, a big portion of his video is dedicated to the lack of archiving around the John Bob situation, save for Bedhead Bernie's video. Twitter is an unreliable backing up source, and in many cases tweets are deleted, reported, or taken down by put in place spam bots. Accounts can also be deleted, suspended, or removed from the platform, so it's easy for a small tweet or thread to get lost in the ether. Think about it. When the John Bob controversy entered its peak, how many people were talking about him and in what quantities? If to figure out the whole truth you need to find a few specific threads today in 2021, how difficult do you think it would be to search them up if they even still exist anymore among the vast ocean of tweets about John? Not to mention all the tweets having nothing to do with the John Bob we're talking about now, and instead have to do with many other people who have the same name. Documentation in video form is necessary to make sure people know what's happening so John can't just come back someday. So the more videos made saying and showing what happened, the better. Daft also got in contact with multiple people in private to discuss stories of John, what he did, how he acted, and so on, including info that was not already public domain. Therefore, that first argument for not making the video at all is completely destroyed. Moral, don't assume everyone knows everything about a situation just because maybe you have some knowledge on it, especially when the event is old and lacks documentation. On the argument of people wanting to move on, that gets into the moral portion of the argument against Daft. When taking into account the thought of people are trying to get past this and you're not helping by bringing it back up, the individuals making these arguments seem to forget a few key things. Firstly, they aren't one of the victims and should not speak for them on whether or not they want the story told. Daft personally spoke to multiple of John's victims, who were cooperative and supportive of what Daft was doing. One was even vocal about their story from the beginning. Beyond that, the argument presented can be applied to any tragedy documented in human history. Don't write a newspaper about the Titanic. People are still grieving here. How dare you publicize and document the Kennedy assassination? Think of his family. Unless Daft was intentionally mocking and saying the victims weren't victims, how was he demeaning in any way? I suppose a few might point to his advertisements for his videos on John and Cosmo, which had emojis and aren't subtle in what they're about. And while I believe there are better or worse methods to get people's attention, as Daft is doing with these, and I do believe that sometimes he has crossed the line into insensitive narrative, if you want the former fans of a person to take a closer look at a situation, you need to evoke some kind of reaction from people. And Daft's ads definitely got people talking, whether you agree with it or not. Daft also gets the permission of the victims involved before posting them, though for those who are offended, he has made a public apology recently. Actually, moving away from that, now that I'm talking about it, that isn't even the argument. The argument is that Daft shouldn't cover the topic because it makes people think of bad memories, and to those people, please listen. It may be painful to relive instances you feel uncomfortable or sad about, but they are necessary for us to learn, grow, and keep people like John from returning to his platform in front of old fans that don't know better. Those who do not learn history are doomed to repeat it, as the old phrase goes, and it's inane to assume otherwise because it's better to save the hurt feelings of some. We should feel empathy for anyone affected by a person that's done something horrible to them, but trying to ignore and act like it never happened isn't going to help them, and instead actively hurts the chances of learning the moral from the experience by making it so people in the future cannot learn from it and, well, repeat history. Some would even go as far as to say the topic shouldn't be covered because it would somehow discourage other people from speaking up, and that goes under the assumption the abuser is being applauded or that the victim is being mocked, as another person would imply, though those are both equally untrue within the video if you watch it. Speaking of which, what got people most in arms about Daft's video was that he had actually interviewed John Bob and was going to feature it in the video. Above everything else, when Daft announced John being a part of his video as an interviewee, most used the word platforming to refer to it, specifically how they believed Daft was giving a platform to the abuser. Both before and after the video's release, there were people saying this, but taking a quick peek at the video reveals Daft explicitly mentions those kind of assumptions made about the video alongside other points Twitter had, as I've shown before. Basically, giving someone a platform implies that the person involved is being given a chance to speak their mind in a way they haven't before. It's exposing them to another audience so they can present the case they have to make and what they want to say. And that isn't what Daft did. He interviewed John to see what exactly he might go against in relation to Bernie's video and other people's statements so Daft could refute them. He wanted to challenge what John said and speak to him rather than allow himself to be spoken to. One person brought up an example of how they thought about the situation by saying they'd bring back an undead Ted Bundy to interview him, but Ted Bundy was interviewed when he was alive. Extensively. Back to Daft, if anything can be learned here, it's that you shouldn't jump to conclusions about a person's motivations for choosing to speak with a person that's done bad to others. For reference, to make those kinds of inferences about a person, you should look at their track record. Daft interviewed Cosmodor, Antunes, and many other unfavorable people, not because he supported them, but because he wanted answers to questions and to challenge their personal beliefs if he saw fit. Daft bringing light to these kinds of situations and talking to the abuser to show why they're wrong has actually been shown to be really helpful, and in many instances more victims have even come out and felt comfortable to speak. Of course, if you don't like the video covering the story, you can always resort to those two fallback options that never fail to get someone to agree with you in some capacity, those being from credibility standpoint and advertising standpoint. If you want to destroy a person's credibility faster than any other way, bring up something the person has done in their past. It doesn't matter what it is, when it was, if you changed, if you didn't even do anything. If it can be pointed at in order to make you seem less credible, someone will do it, and they did it for Daft, saying he platformed a Nazi? I don't have any idea what they're talking about. On the bit about thinking that someone may have faked their eating disorder, yes, Daft did say that back in 2019, but he has since taken down the video, been very vocal about the fact that he regrets it, has made multiple public apologies, and even met up with the person in person to be able to apologize. Remember kids, if someone has to go to something completely unrelated to the topic you're discussing in order to try and discredit what you say, it's most likely they have nothing on the video itself. Or there's the tried and true method of clout and views. Claim the person made the video because they're attention whores and wannabe celebrities piggybacking off of a serious topic to get views and money. I've mentioned it once before, but some people really don't understand that YouTube and other platforms specifically make it harder to find videos and get out the message you want people to see if the videos aren't monetized, so not doing so can be detrimental to the video? Also, many YouTubers do YouTube as a job, and telling them to be morally decent they can't monetize a video they worked a long time on because the topic is sensitive doesn't make make any sense. Oh, and there's also the little factor of you having to go against any and all news documentaries in infographic media relating to a tragic topic if they have ads placed in them or in between them, or make you pay to view them. You usually don't bat an eye when paying for a magazine or Netflix subscription or cable. Okay, no one uses cable, but you get my drift. You have to pay to consume all these types of media, so in truth, if you oppose all YouTubers making money covering a story, shouldn't you oppose all of this and ask that all media relating to tragic events be completely free regardless of effort, time, money, or whatever else? Yeah, I thought so. Don't say a YouTuber doesn't have morals because they monetize a video. After looking over this mini Twitter drama around Daft's video and how people choose to respond, what are a few takeaways we can glean from the whole situation? Well, firstly, watch a video before judging it. You can never truly know a creator's intentions based on an announcement of a person within their video or what the video will be about. Second, don't get all of your information for a situation from only one person that is clearly biased in their own favor. Getting one side of a story and filling in blanks for it without research isn't going to help when the other side provides information that changes the narrative being spun. Third, don't assume because a bad person is being interviewed for a project, they're being defended or quote-unquote given a platform. If the pyrocynical situation is anything to go by, we need to know the difference when using certain words to not make them sound worse than they actually are, or in this case, not correct at all. Fourth, don't try to morally grandstand on people making videos about serious topics because you don't like that they monetized it or are doing it for clout, even if they add something to the conversation or document the history well. Like I said, we'd have to shun any and all professional news by that standard. Finally, fifth, never assume that everyone knows the situation you may have a grasp of. In many instances, they could have no idea due to a lack of documentation or ease at which essential information for learning about what happened can be lost. It's not a crime to want to give your own perspective on a topic that's hurt people as long as you do so in a respectful way, and that's exactly what Daft did. As a closer for this video, I thought I'd bring on a person that was initially part of the mob against Daft to show their perspective on what happened and how people can change their minds when given the opportunity to understand something better. Ladies and gentlemen, allow me to introduce Cartoonchi.
Hi there, I'm Cartoonchi, although I go by Toon for short. Truly my genius knows no bounds. On the 3rd of April this year, I made a thread of very angry tweets directed at Daft Pina given my knowledge on the situation surrounding him, while also concluding by saying I'd be making a video on the situation. I initially found Daft's way of handling his video's advertising to be wildly insensitive, with his reactions to this criticism not being handled particularly well. I also took major issue with what I believed at the time to be a very antagonistic and disgusting treatment of a close friend of mine, Dylan Doodles, who was previously mentioned in this video. Given that I had known about Daft's DMs with Dylan since his video on Cosmodor, I had gotten the impression that Daft had tried to bully a minor into giving him information on Cosmodor and used scare tactics, like saying he is withholding evidence and assisting Cosmo to get what he wanted. And after seeing Daft shade Dylan in his video on John Bob, I was genuinely convinced that Daft had some kind of bad blood with Dylan if he wished to ruin him like this. However, as Brax has clearly brought up in this video and in my DMs in response to my thread, I was very wrong and misinformed. Not one of my friends or Dylan had told me the added context to this situation, with Daft not knowing if Dylan was lying about his age or not. Which is a reasonable assumption, I guess, given this was Cosmodor's secret server which could have harbored more potential sex offenders. And in the case of Cosmo's friends, it certainly did, and rightfully assuming he was covering for Cosmo. While I still agree that Daft could have handled the situation a lot better, I don't think Daft was morally unjust in this situation. For all he knew, there could have been a really bad grooming ring and Dylan could have been a part of it, and before we continue, I must emphasize right now that Dylan was not involved with any of the grooming, and there is no proof that even comes close to showing he knowingly protected these people. If that's your takeaway from this and you are spreading false information, please focus on the criticism at hand. Back on topic, I also had the same realization about how Dylan was brought up in Daft's video on John Bob, and I also had no idea that Dylan was sharing these DMs between him and LS Mark without Mark's consent, which genuinely made my heart sink a bit after including them in my thread as I didn't want to spread these non-consensually taken screenshots any further. And while I still stand by my criticisms of Daft's advertising, I do understand that advertising is very important for success on this platform. I just wish that Daft could advertise his videos on matters such as grooming a little more appropriately instead of doing stupid stuff like making a fucking poll to ask people if they're excited for a video. You know, about grooming. But away with all of that, what was even the point of me saying this? If the particularly large gap in your synapses has prevented you from realizing yet, it is perfectly acceptable when in the middle of drama, even ones as seemingly personal as this one was to me, to change your position once presented with new facts. I'm not one for flip-flopping between positions like crazy, I think a certain furry has taught us about that, but it is always perfectly fine to carefully analyze the new points presented to you and change your mind accordingly. Think for yourself in these situations and don't follow the hive mind. If you are skeptical, then be skeptical and come to your own conclusions. And as a closing note for me, I'd like to say that as a friend of Dylan Doodles, do not attack him over this situation. Am I disappointed in his actions? Of course I am. But I'm not going to hold it against him, and I'd like to remind everyone that he is still a minor. This does not excuse his slip-ups, but I have full confidence he will learn from this and grow as a person as we all do. Anyway, sorry for taking up so much of this video, Brax, you can end it now. See you later.
With that being said, thank you all for watching, and I'll see you all whenever the next one is. Let me know if you like these smaller projects on the side, and I might get Croy to edit some more. Peace.